Hello and welcome to Heartbeat. This week, Peter interviews former President of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, Professor David Galloway. Catherine brings us the news from home and abroad. And I give my viewpoint on why we don't hate abortion enough.
Professor David Galloway is a surgeon and a former president of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons in Glasgow. He's worked in hospitals in Glasgow, London and in New York, and is currently Honorary Professor of Surgery at the College of Medical, Veterinary and Life Sciences at the University of Glasgow. And David joins me now. David, thank you for joining me. In the field at the moment of assisted suicide, a number of concerns have been raised that our parliamentarians are not protecting the conscience of medical professionals. There are fears that if someone's asked for assisted suicide and they don't want to be complicit or involved in any way, they'll still be obliged to refer a patient to someone who will carry out the procedure for them, even though that's against their wishes. As a medical professional yourself, are you worried about this erosion of conscience protection?
Let me make 2 points about that, Peter. First of all, just a general point, and that is when I speak to my colleagues in medical practice, the alarming thing is the relative lack of engagement. You know, we talk a lot about what level of understanding the public have as to the mechanics and what's actually involved in this whole process as proposed in the legislation. But within the medical profession, there is also a great deal of hands-off attitude, almost to the point of being a little bit ignorant of what is actually involved. Now, to get to your specific point about conscience, we are protected as physicians and surgeons to a large extent by the kind of regulations that we operate under. And that is that for certain other controversial procedures or medical interventions, there is a measure of protection for those who have some kind of moral or conscientious objection to being so involved. To the point that we must not be obstructive. So just how that would play out in terms of a doctor being approached to be asked to provide a service such as this, as is proposed in this legislation, how would that play out in practical terms obviously hasn't been tested, but it's pretty clear that the intent of legislation, both north and south of the border, is that not only is there no obstruction, but the doctor concerned has to almost facilitate the process by referring on. And I think many people who have an objection to this would find that deeply uncomfortable.
There's also been, I think, an opinion poll carried out among some palliative care specialists who, for those reasons, have said if push comes to shove, they'd sooner leave the profession.
Yeah, I saw that. That's about a year and a half or so ago from memory. But you're quite right. It was the Association of Palliative Care Specialists who had a poll about this, and a very tiny minority of their number were prepared to be supportive of the proposed legislation. The vast majority, and of course these are the very people who are involved day to day in caring for people in that situation who have irremediable suffering and real challenges with symptom control and all the rest of it. And they are very good at that. And so when you hear an opinion like that, or that expressed through the process of that particular survey, very alarming. Whether or not they would actually leave their job and their livelihood as a result, clearly time would tell, but the very fact that they're thinking in that direction is worrying.
But I suppose it also runs the risk that it reduces the intake to the profession in future years.
For sure.
So in some ways then, it kind of gives the lie to this idea that we're being sold at the moment. That is, it will just be an option. You'll have those who want palliative care, you can still access palliative care, and those who don't, you can access this service. But if within the palliative care profession numbers drop, that'll make it harder. And secondly, there's just the raw economics of cost, and we're looking at, you know, the strain on NHS budgets, etc.
We should come back to the cost issue, but it's actually worse than you suggest in this regard, because if a palliative care specialist is approached and they have a conscientious objection to this, they have to refer on. There's a whole business then of what happens at institutional level, and you might want to cover that, but it does look as though that hospices may not be in a position to opt out of providing this service. And just thinking about the legal scenario, within Scotland in particular, you talk about this being an option. It might actually be more than an option. It might be a matter of legal implication that we have to, as physicians and surgeons, actually suggest all the treatment options that are available. Mm-hmm. And if this becomes a treatment option, in other words, putting the patient down, to use terminology like that, then it would seem bizarre to me, with my history, with the history of those who trained with me, that have practiced medicine, to be offering patients to shorten their life. I mean, we've been in the business of dealing with suffering for sure, but definitely not foreshortening life deliberately. If that becomes a treatment option that has to be covered, then it's a good deal. I mean, the implication is a good deal more extensive than just being an option.
Yeah, no, they are. They're deep and they're very, very significant. Another aspect of this has been the competence and the maturity of those who might want to access the service. Now, we have seen some movement on the minimum age. It's gone from 16 up to 18. And for many people, they may say, well, they're an adult at 18, so that's fine. People at 18 can make a decision. But interestingly, 3 years ago, the Scottish Government changed their sentencing rules. And they said, I'll quote what they said, that young people generally have a lower level of maturity and a greater capacity for change. They're more vulnerable to influence such as peer pressure and trauma. In other words, they're less able to make decisions. And for the last few years, Scottish courts have had to take that into account when sentencing someone under the age of 25. Surely there's a massive hypocrisy here in saying, but at 18 you can make literally a life and death decision.
Yeah, it's incoherent. I mean, it's just a completely inconsistent position to take. And it's always been taken for ideological reasons. No question about that.
Now, the other difference that's open north and south of the border is the idea of the 6-month limitation. The concept that this is a service that would only be available to someone who'd been, quote, given 6 months to live, unquote. But you'll know more than I do about the difficulty of making those, maybe even the impossibility of making those sort of diagnoses. But how concerned are you that even without that definition, loose though it may be, we're just opening the door to something that's extremely wide and extremely vague and can be accessed for potentially almost any reason?
Yeah, no, you're quite right. You know, the whole business of prognostication is a bit of a dark art anyway. So, you know, to try and say to someone that they have 6 months to live is no more than a bit of a shot in the dark. Might be an educated guess, there might be some literature behind it. You can get much more accurate as death clearly approaches and you're getting down to a matter of hours or days, then you can be reasonably specific. But even then, I mean, we're always surprised by the outcome. But in terms of the width of this, in the proposed Scottish legislation, where there is no time limit on terminal illness, such as it is, it just immediately flies a red flag for me because it opens the door to a whole range of conditions that we would not normally think of as being terminal illnesses. You know, and in fact, when you look at jurisdictions elsewhere in the world, you see how terminal illness has, in the context of equality legislation, has become chronic illness. So then you're talking about conditions like arthritis and diabetes and mental illness eventually, although not many, apart from perhaps Holland and Belgium, have gone down that particular track. But then before long, you extend it even further to those who are young and suffering, and you referred to that already about the age limitation. And so you can see that while these are regarded in some respects as safeguards, within the context of an equality framework, they're actually regarded as barriers to be swept aside. And so, you know, I don't want to be cynical about this, but the reality is in just about every single jurisdiction that you examine, there's been a steady expansion as time has gone by.
Yes, once you open Pandora's box, you cannot put the lid back on again. You mentioned Belgium, Holland. I mean, there was a very horrific case in Belgium, a young woman, I think she was 22, who availed herself of an assisted death there on the grounds that she was not able to progress beyond a trauma she had suffered.
It's a year and a half ago that happened, and it hit the headlines at the time. And I have a picture of her in one of the slide presentations I give, because it was just such a galling thing to appreciate that here was a girl with mental illness, certainly treatable and certainly not something that we would typically want to simply abandon. And it's almost a completely defeatist attitude to just fold and say, well, we'll approve her suicidal ideation.
Which must mean that if we enact this sort of legislation, surely the steps that the state has taken in the past to counsel people against suicide and to create suicide prevention programs start to become also incoherent.
Yeah, totally incoherent. I mean, where do you draw the line between someone who has perhaps a very difficult situation with arthritis or diabetes or some other terminal illness, even although we can't put a time limit on it, and someone who is suicidal for other reasons, perhaps more the typical reasons that we associate with suicidal ideation today. So in one case, we're saying, yeah, go ahead, we want to push this. On the other side, we're saying, no, we want to prevent this. It puts us in a completely incoherent position. You're right.
We've even had a suggestion from one Scottish politician that if the law's passed, we should have the equivalent of abortion buffer zones, but it would be assisted suicide buffer zones around hospitals so that you couldn't dissuade anyone making their way into hospital, which did make me think, if someone was going into hospital with the intention of jumping off the roof to kill themselves, could you dissuade them? Whereas if they were going into a ward for an appointment to be injected, it would be a criminal offence.
Peter, we're living in a society where if you hold the door open for somebody in a wheelchair, it's considered a microaggression. I mean, all of these things just come to the fore, you know, it seems nonsense.
So talking about the hospitals and the NHS in general, you must be concerned that at its root, this would be a massive sea change in the way medicine and in the way the health service works. If hospitals can become a place of death, a place in the sense where death is provided, not where death happens, doesn't that invert what hospitals are there for?
Yeah, I mean, it turns medical practice on its head in many respects. It completely changes the ethos and the whole drive of providing medical care, which has been to relieve suffering and to prolong life. I mean, if you go back, and it's a long time, I think, since the Hippocratic Oath specifically was used for graduating medical students. I mean, when I graduated back in the late 70s, already it had been watered down to quite a significant extent. You know, the business of not giving any harmful medication to anyone, which is enshrined in the Hippocratic Oath, all of that is kind of watered down and just dealt with by kind of platitudinous language, to be honest. And there have been various. Having said that, mind you, the situation internationally is that while there are a number of countries that support this idea of assisted suicide or doctor-assisted suicide, they are certainly the minority still. Even within the United States, the minority. Canada has gone lock, stock and barrel down that track. I mean, just with great enthusiasm, it seems, such that almost 20% of all deaths in Canada are now medically assisted. But, you know, the whole ethos of medical practice would inevitably change. Whereas at the present time, we'd like to think that we can genuinely trust the caring professions to look after us and make the best decision for us. If one of these decisions that they arrive at for whatever reason, without necessarily knowing all the detail of the person's history and all the network of their family and all the rest of it, whether or not there might be some evidence of coercion, all of these things play into this. If that trust is eroded, medical practice changes forever and doesn't come back.
Would there still be, within the medical profession, and even with the most recent graduates into medicine, an acceptance of the old do no harm principle? Is it still there, however diluted?
It is still there. It's interesting, one of my colleagues has had a number of opportunities to speak to medical students in different universities in Scotland and has just probed that particular issue to see what the level of understanding and enthusiasm, what there might be for a change in the law such as this, and it's worryingly high, actually. I remember when I was president of the Royal College a few years ago, we sought some opinion from our fellows and members around the country on a whole range of issues, including termination of pregnancy, including assisted suicide, and a bunch of other things that were particularly topical at the time. And inevitably, there's a division of view. There are some people who for whatever reason, feel that it's a credible thing to support this. Some people think it's the compassionate way. Some people think it's the major support for autonomy. I mean, my view on all of these things are, first of all, I think the choice issue is important, but it's important that we have consent, informed consent, we have autonomy, but it has to be in the setting where my choice doesn't harm someone else. And that's the worry with this. In terms of the compassion side, I don't think it's a particularly compassionate route if you actually understood the mechanics of how an assisted death by self-administered lethal medication might actually translate into what happens to the individual. It is far from dignified and far from compassionate. And the credibility thing, you know, you mentioned briefly earlier on about the business of saving money. You know, when a cash-strapped NHS, I well remember being shocked as I read an article you may have seen in the Times a couple of years ago from Matthew Paris, saying, you know, we can't afford all this senescence and all these people becoming utterly dependent on the health service. You know, this idea of being able to finish people off in a legal and humane way is very attractive, and we can't avoid it. And so there is certainly a move to push that whole angle as well.
The UK government's own impact assessment into the Leadbeater Bill set it out exactly in pounds and pence and what could actually be saved. So you can see from across the spectrum, including presumably officials in the Treasury, looking at that and thinking, why not?
It's cynical, it's sad, but I'm afraid that's the way that many of our politicians are driven to think these days.
So where we stand right now, if you like, on the precipice or on the brink, what's your hope? Do you feel hope, or are you gloomy? Are you worried that we could, a year from now, be looking at assisted suicide legislation across the UK?
We inevitably could be. I mean, technically that's possible, and it has cleared most of the hurdles so far. I'm heartened by the rhetoric from the House of Lords at the present time, where there's been well over now 1,000 amendments proposed to the Leadbeater Bill, and these will have to be dealt with and will take their course. It could be that there's a more imminent decision coming in the Scottish Parliament. I do think, however, that the rhetoric that this is what the public want is a particularly misguided piece of spin. And the reason for that is because when you actually ask the public what they understand by the process of assisted dying, some of them think it's to do with do not resuscitate, some of them think it's to do with palliative care, although a small minority. Some of them think it's to do with, just increasing the medication, the whole kind of double effect to deal with pain. And I suppose they see that as an extension of what this is. Nothing like that at all. It's completely different. And when the public have been educated, there's a very interesting study this summer, south of the border admittedly, but where they looked at over 2,000 adults and asked them what they understood about the process and then told them what was actually involved, gave them 10 facts about what assisted suicide would actually mean. The level of support fell from 70% to 13%. So if the public only understood and could make an informed choice, I think we might have a very different rhetorical position.
Well, for what you're doing to bring some of these facts to light and for the campaigning you're doing to raise awareness of the extreme dangers of this legislation, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
As the years go by, our thoughts turn to the legacy we'll leave behind. Family, friends, memories, they all form part of the life we've lived. SPUC works to protect the most vulnerable among us. We put unborn children first. We speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. You can help us with this work by leaving a legacy to SPUC. It could be the most far-reaching gift you ever make, and it will allow our life-changing work to continue. Email the address on screen or call the number shown and help us to fight for life.
A leading group of palliative care specialists has issued a stark warning about the Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Scotland Bill, expressing profound and escalating worries over the safety and practical implications of the legislation before Holyrood. In a strongly worded letter to MSPs, Medics from the Association of Palliative Medicine outlined what they describe as serious clinical concerns about the current form of the bill, which is scheduled for a decisive parliamentary vote in the coming weeks. The APM, representing more than 1,400 palliative medicine specialists across the UK, including over 120 in Scotland, argue that the proposed law is clinically unsafe, inequitable and unworkable. The group said the threshold for safety in matters of life and death must be unassailable and claimed the bills fall short, particularly given unequal access to quality palliative care in Scotland. Medics warned that normalising assisted dying could compound existing inequities rather than address suffering. The intervention by senior clinicians comes as a bill introduced by Liberal Democrat MSP Lee MacArthur has progressed further through the legislative process than previous efforts on the issue. Our own William Curry brings us an update on the legislation.
Over the next few weeks, MSPs here in the Scottish Parliament will be debating and voting at Stage 3 of Liam MacArthur's Assisted Dying Scotland Bill. With just 9 MSPs needed to change their mind in order for the bill to be defeated, the fate of this legislation is on a knife edge. SPUC is campaigning against this bill and is encouraging supporters to lobby their MSP in person or in writing, expressing their concerns about assisted suicide. The horror stories from other jurisdictions where assisted suicide has been legalised make clear why it is not legislation Scotland should import.
Separately, faith leaders across Wales have issued a joint statement expressing serious concerns about the proposed terminally ill adults end-of-life bill and urged the Senate to withhold legislative consent when it is debated later this month. The statement, signed by leaders from Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh and Hindu communities, comes ahead of a scheduled vote in the Welsh Parliament on the 24th of February 2026 on whether to give consent to Westminster's assisted dying legislation. In their message, the signatories emphasised Wales' tradition of care and compassion for the sick, vulnerable and dying, arguing that introducing assisted suicide would have profound ethical and social implications for the country. They wrote that true compassion does not mean ending a life, but rather accompanying those who suffer, easing their pain and supporting families so that no one feels abandoned or like a burden. The statement urged people in Wales to contact their local members of the Senate to express concern and to encourage a vote against consenting to the legislation. New statistics from Quebec's Public Health Insurance Board show a nearly 80% increase in the use of the abortion pill in 2025 compared with the previous year, raising questions about the impact of eased regulation on women's health and prenatal protections. The increase comes after Quebec relaxed rules in 2022 that previously required ultrasound confirmation and physician-only prescribing, enabling broader access and allowing nurse practitioners and midwives to prescribe the medication. Meanwhile, in the USA, the Iowa legislature has passed a bill that would reinstate in-person requirements for both stages of medical abortion, a move lawmakers and health advocates say is necessary to protect women's health and ensure robust clinical oversight. Under existing federal and state pandemic-era policies, both mifepristone and misoprostol, the two drugs used in a chemical abortion, can be prescribed and obtained through telehealth and mail order. The new measure would require that women receive the first pill in person from a qualified healthcare provider, reversing the current system that allows remote prescribing and at-home use without a clinical evaluation, according to a report by Live Action. Iowa lawmakers cited concerns that their mail-order access to abortion pills can bypass critical steps like ultrasound confirmation, test for gestational age, and evaluation of medical history. More than 2,500 women in the United States are suing pharmaceutical company Pfizer over allegations that its contraceptive injection, Depo-Provera, is linked to the development of brain tumours and that adequate warnings were not provided. The lawsuits, which have been consolidated in federal court, claim long-term use of the injectable contraceptive increased the risk of meningioma, a typically benign but potentially serious brain tumour. Plaintiffs allege Pfizer knew or should have known about the risk and failed to properly inform patients and healthcare providers. Our first trial in the US litigation is expected to begin in 2026. Pfizer has said it stands by the safety profile of Depo-Provera and continues to monitor data in line with regulatory requirements. In the UK, law firms have confirmed they are investigating potential claims on behalf of women who developed meningiomas after prolonged use of the injection. The firms say they have been contacted by individuals concerned about hospital links and are assessing whether legal action could be pursued in UK courts. Depo-Provera is a long-acting hormonal contraceptive administered every 3 months and has been widely prescribed for decades. Developing legal action raises renewed questions about risk communication, patient consent and long-term effects of hormonal contraception. Scotland's annual Night to Shine event took place in Hamilton last week, and SPUCTV's Peter Carney reports.
Staff and pupils of Holy Cross High School Hamilton welcomed over 80 guests of honour, joining with nearly 700 churches around the world who hosted Night to Shine 2026 events globally. All united by one powerful message, that every life is precious and every person deserves to shine. All the events are generously sponsored by the Tim Tebow Foundation, whose vision and commitment make nights like this possible. Guests of honour, along with their families and carers, were treated like true VIPs. Thanks to the generosity of donors, including Boston Wedding and Events, Houston Kilt Makers, Tunnocks, Boots and SPUC.
And finally, this week marks a special milestone for SPUCTV. Thanks to your support and the efforts of our team, we now have over 50,000 subscribers and have had almost 300,000 views for our content. We couldn't have got here without your support, so thank you for being with us on the journey. And if you haven't already, please remember to like, subscribe and share. I'm Catherine Mokler and this was SPUCTV News, bringing to light what others hide.
I don't hate abortion enough. You don't hate abortion enough. None of us hate abortion enough. I know that's quite a claim to make, given that I don't actually know you, but I think my claim holds weight. And if you stick around for the next few minutes or so, I'll explain why. Now, I also know that hate is a strong word, but I'm using that word very much consciously here. Much of the language of the contemporary pro-life movement is understandably positive. It's even captured in that very compound word, pro-life. We are for life. We are for unborn babies. We are for the flourishing of families. All that is well and good, and we must never tire of reminding people of the beauty of new life. But sometimes we need to remind ourselves what we are against. What we are against is the barbaric killing of tiny human lives, whether these lives are flushed down the toilet like medical waste or ripped apart in their mother's womb. It is this that we hate, and it is this that should stir up within us a righteous anger. I'm William Curry, and this is Viewpoint. When I say I hate abortion, I'm referring largely to the end goal of abortion, which is a dead unborn baby. But I'm also referring to what comes before that, the various abortion procedures themselves. It's worthwhile reminding ourselves what these entail. In a first trimester medical abortion, which is encouraged up to 10 weeks gestation, the mother takes the mifepristone pill, which serves the purpose of blocking progesterone. As a result, the lining of the mother's uterus breaks down, cutting off oxygen and nutrients to the embryo. Then 1 to 2 days after the first pill is taken, the mother takes misoprostol, the purpose of which is to force the dead embryo out of her uterus. It can take a while for this to happen, and during this time, the mother can be in severe pain. She may sit on the toilet, lie in bed, and ultimately may even see the expelled embryo, her child, in its pregnancy sac. Another method, typically encouraged in the second trimester from 14 to 22 weeks, is dilation and evacuation, or surgical abortion. A cannula is placed in the mother's uterus, which drains or hoovers out the amniotic fluid. A sofa clamp is then inserted in to remove the baby limb by limb. The hardest part of the process is removing the baby's head. This is achieved by grasping the head with a clamp and crushing it so that it fits through the cervix. The abortionist knows they have successfully crushed the skull when a white substance, that was the baby's brains, leaks out through the cervix. There are other abortion methods, but for the sake of brevity, I won't mention them here. But I do encourage you to watch my interview with former abortionist Dr John Bruchalski, who describes the various procedures he used to carry out. So, this is the grisly reality that lies behind the rather sanitised word abortion. But back to my original claim, that we don't hate abortion enough. In brief, what I'm arguing here is that many of us who say we hate it do not back up our talk with action. I'm going to begin first with myself. As someone who works full-time in the pro-life movement, I'm acutely aware that I'm accountable not only to my employers, but to the unborn babies that I'm trying to help. I find that it can be all too easy to get lost in the rhythm of work and thus momentarily forget why I'm doing what I'm doing. So even I need to be frequently reminding myself just how utterly evil abortion is. And these reminders should serve the purpose of propelling me into greater action. Looking beyond myself though, I want to take a look at those Christian traditions who claim to be against abortion, but do so little to try to end it. As a Roman Catholic, I'm going to start with my own. Now let me be clear, it is a source of great pride to me that the Catholic Church is undeniably the single greatest advocate of the unborn child and of the traditional family unit. SPUC boasts a significant number of supporters who are Catholic, and in truth, without these supporters, we would cease to exist. However, there is still so much more that the Catholic Church at large and individual practicing Catholics could and should be doing for the pro-life cause. Anecdotally, it came as a pleasant surprise to me when, at Mass recently on the Feast of the Holy Innocents, the priest boldly referred to, quote, the abomination of abortion. It was refreshing for me to hear a priest speak about the issue, but the truth is, this shouldn't have come as a surprise to me. As a Mass-going Catholic, I should be hearing the priest talk about the evil of abortion and the remedy to that evil much more frequently than I do. But it's not solely down to clerics. As lay Catholics, we also need to take some responsibility in doing our bit to end abortion. We can't just sit around waiting for orders to be issued from the pulpit. I have long said that if you consider yourself a serious pro-lifer, whether Catholic or otherwise, it is not enough to just attend SPUC conferences once a year, or the March for Life in London once a year, or to make the odd donation here and there. You need to be actively pro-life every single month of the year. If you're a student, join your university pro-life society. If a little older, join your local SPUC branch, or help set one up if there isn't one in your area. This is no mean feat, but SPUC would love to help you here. Events like SPUC conferences are great, but they exist to propel us into further action. Now, whilst it's certainly not all about charitable income, and as I mentioned, to be truly pro-life is to act upon this belief, I do think it's worth looking at SPUC's income, contrasted with the incomes of Catholic charities in the UK, as this is a helpful indicator of where we're at. A couple of quick disclaimers though. Firstly, all of the following information is publicly available. And secondly, whilst SPUC is not a Catholic charitable organisation, as I said, we do boast a lot of Catholic supporters, and the pro-life cause is very much in keeping with Catholic teaching. SPUC's annual income sits at around £3 million, which is obviously a huge amount of money. But without naming names, I want to contrast this with the tens of millions of pounds that Catholic charities in the UK receive each year. Now, don't get me wrong, many of these charities and causes are worthwhile. But the fact is, abortion is the single greatest injustice of our time. Yet the numbers do not reflect this. I really think that we need to redress this imbalance. Not just in a financial sense, but also when it comes to how much time and effort we're pouring into combating the various injustices that we face. And looking beyond the Catholic Church to Protestant traditions, there is evidence of not simply apathy regarding abortion, but full-on support of it. A recent Students for Life of America report found an uptick in Christian colleges' support for abortion and Planned Parenthood. Amongst other things, the report found that some of the self-proclaimed Christian colleges support abortion on their website, even providing resources for students to access them. This shows that inactivity when it comes to abortion on the part of Christian leaders can breed not simply apathy about the issue amongst Christians, but actual support of the very thing they should be against. Another point that I really want to hammer home here is that we need to hate abortion as much as our opponents seem to love it. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that all or even most advocates of abortion actively love abortion. But there is a small yet powerful core of people that do. And there are two very recent cases that exemplify this. Geraldine Hickey is an Australian comedian, and in late December 2025, she posted this on social media. The caption reads, "Took my wife out for fancy dinner to celebrate her doing 300 abortions for the year." Her so-called wife is a woman by the name of Catherine Bateman, who works as a nurse practitioner candidate at La Trobe Community Health Service in New South Wales, Australia. The sight of two middle-aged women celebrating the killing of 300 precious, unrepeatable unborn lives is truly ghoulish. Even more terrifying is the number of people in the comments section applauding them. Another example of an unhinged love for abortion comes from American activist group Shout Your Abortion. In November 2025, they released this children's book titled "Abortion is Everything." In their words, "Abortion is Everything" speaks directly to 5 to 8-year-olds about what abortion is, how it might feel, and why people have abortions. Promoting abortion as a virtue to young children is nothing short of demonically inspired. I hope you can see now that when I say some people love abortion, I really mean it. So my challenge for you, the viewer, is to hate abortion at least as much as they love it. Take some confidence in the fact that whilst they're working for the evil one, we are quite literally doing God's work. Another point I need to make is that the opposition also seem to outwork many of us in the pro-life movement. As an example, Diane Munday, who died recently in early January 2026 at the age of 94 and was the co-founder of BPAS, the British Pregnancy Advisory Service, embodied this idea. The Guardian interviewed Munday literally a matter of weeks before she died, and the interview paints a picture of a woman who fought for abortion with sheer doggedness. It mentions how pre the 1967 Abortion Act, Munday went up and down the country promoting abortion to the Women's Institute, Rotary clubs, and towns' women's guilds. The report also makes clear that right up until the end, Munday spent most of her days at work in her home office. Now, I say all this not to laud Diane Munday as some sort of heroine. No, she was working for evil, and her legacy is one of death and destruction. But the point here is that she worked with a tenacity and a drive that would put many of us in the pro-life movement to shame. Surely we in the pro-life movement, at the very least, should be more motivated and hard-working than our adversaries. In conclusion then, this viewpoint should not be taken as me admonishing my fellow pro-lifers. Goodness knows we see enough friendly fire in the pro-life movement. Rather, I'm encouraging us all, myself included, to ask ourselves whether we could be doing more to end abortion in this country. If the recently released 2023 abortion statistics, which show that the number of unborn babies being killed in England and Wales is increasing exponentially every year, do not shake us into life, then I'm not sure what will. When we say we hate abortion, do our actions actually reflect that? Do we hate abortion as much as they, our enemies and the enemies of civilization, so clearly love it? I urge you then to act upon that righteous anger you should feel about abortion and fight tooth and nail for unborn children. After all, it is you who are their hands and feet.
That's all we have time for this week. If you are enjoying our content, please like, comment and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions or topics we should cover, please email us at the address on the screen or in the description below. Thanks for watching.